Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of BariAftercare, the podcast. And we have a popular guest returning tonight, popular with both the listeners and myself. She's wise, she's wonderful, she's a brand new grandmother, and it's Dr. Joan Brugman. Do you say Brugman or Brugman?
Brugman.
Good. Okay, I want to make sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. And we're going to be talking about something I know a little bit about as I read about it, but you know a lot more about, and it is called mirror therapy. And let me tell you what I first thought of when you and I talked about doing this. I thought of Mel Robbins doing the high five in the mirror, but it's not exactly that, is it?
It, our sound cut out just a little bit. What did you think at first?
At first, I thought it was like Mel Robbins who says, high five yourself in the mirror before you get going in the morning. But there's a lot more to it.
There is, yes, and for people out there listening that are like me and they're foo fluffy avoidant, let me just say that if they've heard anything about this and it sounds like it's going to be looking in the mirror and going, "I love you," it could be that, but that's not the way I recommend people doing it with regard to weight loss. So if people are going, "Oh God, I don't want to hear about this fuzzy, fluffy stuff," hang there with me. I'm going to tell you it doesn't have to be that way.
It is definitely a lot more than that when we're talking about psychology and how to use it appropriately in your therapy with a psychologist. So, what I'd like to do is I just want you to kind of talk about it, how you use it in the bariatric world and with bariatric patients or anybody working to wanting to lose weight loss. And then I found a great article actually in Psychology Today, and I just kind of want to ask you some questions about that, but you go first and tell us what you know and how you use it. And I'll raise my hand if I want to interrupt and ask a question, okay? Because we have a little bit of a delay. So
Great.
go for it.
Okay. So the book that this is based on came out in 2016. It's a book called Mirror Work by the author's name is Louise Hay. But people have been talking about this in one form or another for a while because you know me, Connie, I'm a science nerd. So I like to try to understand everything from a scientific basis if we can. So way back in the 1990s, some research was being done on monkeys, and they discovered that the monkey brains have these neurons that they called mirror neurons. And when the monkeys observed something happening or when they initiated a behavior themselves, these mirror neurons would fire. And that was interesting, but it was just in monkeys. So as time going along, a lot of research on human behavior begins with other animals. And then somebody says, let's see if that applies to humans. So later on, like 2003 or so, 2003, 2005, out came the first studies that actually looked at human brains under fMRI procedures, where it showed that basically um, automatically and involuntarily, when we see someone do something else, we unconsciously and unintentionally start to mirror that behavior. The parts of our brain that would have been fired up if we had done the behavior also get fired up if we see somebody else do that behavior. So, example, if they showed the participants someone doing something and looking really disgusted, and then if when the study participant watched someone else looking disgusted, the part of their own brain that lights up when they do something, then they feel disgusted. It was exactly the same, even though they were just watching someone else do it. Their brain acted as if they were the one who had experienced something disgusting. So that's pretty interesting. It is literally like monkey see, monkey do.
Sure.
And it's just, just interesting that that's kind of where it came from. So when we see somebody else do something, or when we hear someone else say something, our brain reacts as if it was us. So I don't know that Louise Hay used that research when she developed her procedure of mirror work, but I put that on there. It helps me to understand, why does this make any sense? Why do we care about this? If you think about empathy, like we were talking about me being a new grandmother, when my little granddaughter, Gwendolyn Rose, ends up in preschool or daycare down the road, if one of the other little kids in the daycare is crying, eventually they'll all end up crying, even though the teachers are looking at them like, why are you crying? Nothing happened to you. It's because their brains are actually getting activated by watching the other little kid, in this
Wow.
case, cry. So I like to apply this with my bariatric patients, or we have medical weight loss patients here too. So this certainly applies to anybody who has really struggled with their commitment to their own well-being, really in any way. It doesn't necessarily only apply to weight loss, and it certainly does not apply only to people who've had bariatric surgery. And when I say I encourage them to do mirror work, look in the mirror, look at the person in the mirror. I'm not talking about the fluffy, I love you version. Think of this as more like Kristen Neff's fierce self compassion. Okay. So, what I try to encourage people to do is to understand. You mentioned this on an episode of Dr. Susan Mitchell's great podcast, Bariatric Surgery Success. I think it was episode 186, as a matter of fact, and where she was talking about when people feel upset about how they get treated by other people. And of course, that's valid. And you said that's
Mhm.
valid, but it
Mhm.
might be more helpful to look in the mirror at how we treat ourselves. And I was like jumping up and down going, yes, exactly. That's exactly what I do with folks too. So, because when we're treated unkindly, we're, we're going to feel bad. And then the problem is that we mirror that unkind treatment that we're seeing being directed at us. It's not necessarily intentional, it's probably not even conscious. And it
Right.
might be cruel self talk, calling yourself names or putting yourself down or whatever. Or it could be some other version of self-injurious behavior, like
Right.
eating massive amounts of food. And most bariatric patients are not binge eaters. A lot of people in the world think that. It's not necessarily the case at
Agree.
all, but it might be in some cases. So it might be unhealthy eating behavior that they're doing, which they know is harming them, but they keep doing it anyway, or healthy behavior that they should be doing that they're not doing. And maybe just not doing it, or coming up with a lot of reasons why they can't do those things. But
Mhm.
either way, they're still putting themselves in harm's way. And that's why I call it self injurious behavior.
Agree.
Not necessarily hitting yourself in the head or cutting yourself or things like that, but in knowing doing something that you know is harming your health is still injuring yourself, and it is like mirroring that unkind behavior that we've seen directed at us. um,
Absolutely.
and so you can't control what anybody else does. You mentioned Mel Robbins a few minutes ago and all the work she's done at getting people to accept you can't control anybody else, but by golly, you can control what you do. You do have control over that. So what I try to get people to do is I say to them, you need to be the person that will treat you kindly. You can't make
Correct.
anybody else do that, but you can do it. And
Mhm.
when I say I want you to do this in a mirror, I get a lot of resistance about that.
Yes.
A lot. They almost like it's a PTSD kind of trauma. No, I don't want to do it. And they say, I don't have to do that. I know in my head, I get it, I get it. I need to say nice things to myself. Okay, I will. But based on the science, that isn't enough. In order to trigger those mirror neurons, we need to
Interesting.
see it and or hear it. So the hence using the mirror gives you somebody that you can see, that you can control, saying the things that you need to hear. And the positive affirmations, that's great. But I'm saying to be a little tougher, a little more with the fierce self compassion, to look at yourself in the mirror and start with accountability. So this part plays a little bit off of all the research on internal family systems, where we all have different parts of ourselves that make up who we are. And so it's having the part of you that was not spoken to kindly, the
Mhm.
part that was not defended, the part that nobody was there to make sure that she had what she needed, and you're talking to that person, and you on the outside of the mirror is the person that's taking responsibility. So they're both parts of the self. And I know it sounds a little, you know, crazy. I mean, so you're telling people to talk to themselves? Yes, I am. So you look at yourself in the mirror and you take responsibility. And I don't mean fierce as in I'm going to now flagellate myself. I'm going to
Right.
use this as out of nine tails and punish myself. I'm a terrible person. I did awful things, because whatever you pay the most attention to is what you're going to do more of. And we don't want any more of that. It's simply saying, you know what? I didn't do the right thing for you. I did not protect you. I let the bullies in the world, and the bullies might be people and they might be situations, they might be health conditions, and I let those things hurt you. And I did not defend you. I did not come up with solutions. And it's okay to identify the causes and conditions that led to that. And that's not making excuses. It's just the reality. Maybe I didn't know that I needed to. Maybe I didn't have any tools. I didn't have any help. It's just the reality.
Correct.
But what really matters is not, you don't stop there. You say, the next step is to say, you, the person in the mirror, you did not deserve that. You deserved to be treated with kindness and care and dignity and respect and compassion. I let the bullies knock you down on the playground and kick the crap out of you, and I just stood there and didn't do anything about it. And I was wrong. And, I apologize to you for that, because that did not help you.
I
And
love that.
now I'm going to do something different. And this is really where the rubber meets the road.
Mhm.
It's saying you deserve better. That's the self affirmation. And what am I going to do differently? And I don't mean, BSing it either. I don't coddle people. So I say you got to really be straight. You have to think this out ahead of time. Maybe you
Mhm.
might even need to write it down ahead of time,
Yep.
because you don't, if it's all just nonsense, oh yeah, someday I'm going to be better, that you're not going to believe you. So you have to have an actual plan. Renew your vow to yourself.
I
I am
love that.
recommitting to, and this is what I'm going to do differently next time, because the planet is still the same. The stressors that were there before are probably still there now.
Right.
You know,
Right.
people that were mean to you, stress at your job, your aching knees, it's, all those things are probably all still there. So why would it be any different? Yeah, you didn't defend me before. Why would I believe you're going to defend me now? So you have to have an action plan,
I love
something that's
that.
reachable and sustainable. And this is exactly how I'm going to do it. And that sounds great, but what if you knew that before, but you didn't do it? Right,
Mhm.
because I needed help. And so this is what I'm going to do to get the help. If that was the situation. I didn't have the resources. I didn't
Right.
have any support. I didn't know what to do. So this is how I'm going to find help if that was the obstacle before. What if it was speaking up to food pushers? Somebody just told me that recently. I mean, literally, just right before we came online tonight, the last patient I saw today said that her mom, and so this lady is like in her mid 50s. So her mother, I'm guessing, is somewhere in her mid 70s. She just had bariatric surgery in December. She's doing great. She's almost 100 pounds down in 5 months. It's awesome. But
Wow.
her mom keeps saying to her, that's not enough food. You're going to starve to death. You've got to have more. You're not doing this right. And she needs to stand up and defend herself against her mother. Her mother's just trying to help her. Mother doesn't want her to starve to death, but she doesn't know how to speak up and speak truth to power. So, how is she going to do that? She might need somebody else to speak up for her, to say, hey, don't put her in that position, or actually she is doing the right thing, or something. If she was too
Love it.
intimidated to speak up, then okay, call your support person in to help you, or write it down for the person. So a few minutes ago I said having this written out might be a good thing. I know this awesome person, and actually we both know this person, who has needed to have some difficult conversations, but
Yeah.
she is such a kind, gentle person that if
Yes.
it came down to have confrontation in order to get into heaven, she'd say, just give me my red suit and my pitchfork now, because it's not going to happen. I just have to go to hell then, because I can't do it. But
Right.
so she needed to have this conversation. So she figured out that if she wrote it down first, she could go back and review it and make sure that everything is
That's
feels
right.
justified and that she's saying what she needs to say. And then she started this out by handing it to the person and let the other person read it.
Love
And
it.
then as time went on, I was able to kind of read it to the person, and then super effective at getting situations resolved. The things she was terrified were going to be really emotionally difficult were not nearly as bad. But if she had tried to do it live, just verbally,
Correct.
she would have got tongue tied, and so it just wouldn't have come out right. And that would scare her, and she would back away. So when I
Right.
tell people, okay, here's what I want you to do, I want to go home, go in your bathroom or your bedroom or wherever you've got a mirror and a door. Shut the door, because the other people in your house are going to think you're insane, because you're going to start talking to yourself. And
I
if they
love it.
say, no, I can't do it, I can't do it, then I say, okay, so write it down first. Take responsibility. Give yourself
I
the
love that.
compassionate responses that you would like to have heard from the bullies, that you deserve to be treated better. And then you make a commitment to what you're going to do differently. And so you've got it written out, but now you're going to look at the mirror and you're going to look at a line on your paper, and then you're going to look at yourself in the mirror and say that line. So you're still reading the words. You don't have to come up with it on the fly, but you need to be able to hear it and ideally see it. I've got some folks who've been through some very difficult, really bad trauma, and the idea of looking at themselves in the
Yeah.
mirror, even if they weren't going to say anything, like they have, like their mirror is covered up, they don't want to see themselves. Or maybe they have a mirror that's just from their chin up, but no way are they going to look at their body. So,
Question.
okay, yeah,
If that were the case, would you maybe start the process using, like, the 2 chairs and then bring the mirror as an addition later if they're not ready to look at themselves?
yeah, because that would certainly work. because as long as they're saying it out loud to the empty chair and they can hear it, that's
Right.
it. That is better. So those the original research was based on the visual cortex
Mhm.
firing, but as they continued to do more research, they realized that the auditory cortex also would fire mirror neurons. So they fire if the person themselves does something or if they observe it or hear it in somebody else. So as
Mhm.
long as you're saying it out loud, but what they can't do is just say it silently in their own mind. You have to
Correct.
actually hear it coming from the outside. So
I love
yeah.
it. That is powerful stuff. Okay, keep going. How else might you use it?
Well, and so that has a lot to do with it. What am I going to do to get you on track or even back on track? So for people who haven't had surgery yet, these are the all the gotta doums that they keep telling me I've got to do, and we know based on all of what we know about bariatrics, you have your really helpful little checklist that you have on your website, the behavioral gotta-doums and then the emotional psychological gotta-doums.
Mhm.
Almost every bariatric patient has heard the behavioral parts, at
Right.
least most of the behavioral parts,
Right.
but they rarely ever have heard about the psychological parts. So they say, okay, I haven't started any of this yet, but why do I have to? I haven't had surgery yet. And hopefully they've got a behavioral health person that's going to educate them about that, because any of the surgeons will tell you that is by far the harder part. The surgery is the easy part. The psychological surgery is the hard part. So I haven't done it yet. And why haven't you done it? Well, I'm making up all these excuses.
Mhm.
All right. So how are you going to get on it? That's a good time to start doing it. By the time somebody wants that bariatric surgery, they have already tried a lot of different
For
things,
sure.
medication, maybe, or exercise, or a trillion different diets, or medically supervised diets, all kinds of stuff. And they haven't been successful. So they really need to recommit to themselves. Again, my person I spoke with recently, I was busting her on a couple of things about, listen, when you decided to have bariatric surgery, you committed to change your behavior. And if you don't change anything, you're not going to
Yes,
change
yes, yes, yes,
anything.
yes.
So,
Have I shared with you my little analogy about when you get a driver's license?
no.
So I tell people just what you just said. When people get a driver's license, they they commit to following the rules of the road, right?
Hmm.
When people opt to have bariatric surgery, they are also committing to follow the guidelines for bariatric surgery. And that we have a right to hold them accountable for because they made the commitment.
That's right. And if they don't uphold that commitment, there is a strong chance. Some of the research says 60% of people
Wow.
will have such bad medical problems that 10 or 15 years down the road, they may end up in a hospital because they didn't keep taking their vitamins, they didn't make sure they had enough protein, et cetera, et cetera. And we don't want harm to come to people.
For
So
sure
holding
not.
them accountable is helping maintain the guardrails. So
So I
yeah, it's hard.
yeah. I love how you're using this. And last year, the word of the year in BariAftercare was accountability. And I love this tool as a method of compassionately holding yourself accountable. And this
Hmm.
morning, seriously, just this morning with a patient, kind of like you did, just before you come on here, I was talking to this woman and she is working so hard. She is a joy to work with because she's doing so much work to help herself in all areas of her life. She's had bariatric surgery and she abandons herself, kind of like you were saying, when
Yeah.
somebody bullies you today, or when somebody's like the mother saying, "You're not eating enough." And a lot of our patients are used to, as a child, you don't know how to stick up for yourself. you're not, as a child, intentionally abandoning yourself in those situations. But as an adult, when you learn that, my parents didn't protect me when I was a kid, or there was nobody on the playground who stood up for me, and I felt helpless and abandoned. And the way I say it to them is like you did, just like you did. Let's stop abandoning yourself today, because now you are an adult and you can develop these skills. And I love using this mirroring technique as a tool for self accountability, by saying to yourself, you know what, you really didn't want to drink that much today. That was one of her issues. But going into the looking in the mirror and being kind and compassionate, and said, this was your vow to yourself. This was your goal. And so I'm just kind of recapturing what you said here, um,
Oh,
and saying, but you know what? I did. I had 3 drinks today, and that's not who I want to be. So I'm going to, talk to myself and say, what was going on with you? Well, and then do you do the talk back sort of thing? Like, what would the person in the mirror say back?
if they're brave enough, that would be great. Um, from my experience, it's hard to encourage people or empower them to even do the first step, let alone say anything back, even though it's just them that they're talking to and the door
Right.
is closed. You
Mhm.
don't have to be afraid of yourself. But again, sometimes I have people who tell me, and these are not people with dissociative identity disorder either. They're
Right.
very aware that they have these different parts, or internal family members or whatever, that, and they're kind of afraid because that one, when she starts criticizing me, she is cruel. She calls me really, really bad names, and they know it's just themselves. But even
Right.
still, it's horrific, and I'm kind of afraid to speak up to her. I would love to, but I just get tongue tied and I don't know what to say. And that's when empty chair technique would be great. So you're not looking at the person. It's really scary when you're face to face with somebody, even though it's your own face.
Mhm.
Doesn't matter. It triggers all of these emotional networks in the brain, which
Right.
is why it's so scary. So
Mhm.
empty chair technique is great for that, because then there is no face that you're looking at. It's if you would like to say something back, what could you imagine if there was no consequence? There's nothing bad that's going to happen, strictly fantasy. What would
Right.
you love to say if you could say anything at all to that
Right.
person?
Right.
And
Right.
then go, well, I'd like to tell them they can go straight to hell, or whatever it might be, or I
Exactly.
hate you for abandoning me.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes.
And then you can work from there. How would that feel? What would stop you? So I
Right.
don't want people to then, you know, I definitely do not want to engender self-loathing. These folks
Exactly.
have enough of that already.
Right.
Definitely not that. It's
So,
saying, okay, I get it. You didn't do the right thing. So, but that did hurt me and I'm pretty mad about it. But what are
yes.
we going to do going forward?
Right, and
Yeah.
reaffirming, "I will no longer abandon you," or "I will work toward no longer abandoning you, and these are the steps that I will take. This is what it will look like when I don't abandon you." And I agree with you wholeheartedly about having there are so many ways to do it, having a note on your phone that if it happens, you're at a party and somebody says something cruel and you can't think in the moment because your emotions take over. Go into the bathroom, read your little script, come back out and say, a minute ago you said to me, something about how I was eating, and I would really appreciate if that is no longer a topic between the two of us. So having something, that's why I have on online also that personal protection plan. And I love how you encouraged your patient to write this down, hand it to the person, read it to the person, and then teach them being the the skipped record. When they say something, you go back to your same response and give them the same
Yes.
response, so you don't get lost in your fear or your emotions or feeling overwhelmed. So there's a lot of
Yes.
great ability with
Yep.
this.
Yeah. And it's definitely scary for people to have confrontations with other people because you can't control what they say. And if you have been
Right.
harmed physically or emotionally, I can really understand how terrifying it would be to do that. And it's just interesting that when we're only talking about talking just to yourself, you're not going to reach through the mirror and punch yourself in the head, No, but what if I then start saying, you stupid idiot,
Yeah.
Yeah, and so you have to make a commitment not to do that. You might, and if you do, because it's just an automatic stress response to fight, catch yourself, do some deep breathing, as many of those as it takes to put the pause in between the trigger and the response. Just
Right.
do your breathing. The great thing about doing deep breathing is that you can't be talking while you're doing it. So you can keep yourself out of a lot of trouble. Use your mouth for good and not for bad.
Yes, and
So,
speaking of science, science fully supports that deep breathing, especially inhaling maybe to 4 and exhaling twice the number, and doing that
exactly.
for a few minutes helps with that fight or flight or that panic or that anxiety, and you may have to excuse yourself in like, if you're at the family and the mom's saying some, "You know what? I just am gonna take a little time out for myself." Go calm yourself down, prepare your response, or practice it on your phone. There are so many techniques that we as therapists can use to help bolster this end goal of speaking up for yourself, not abandoning yourself. And part of that is practicing, write the letter, read it 1,000 times so it's well rehearsed, so that mental rehearsal, and having a visualized, and again, you can't control, but a lot of people pretty darn well, and you can pretty much guess how they're gonna respond, and visualize or work, practice, practice with your therapist or, a good friend. Now, if they say this, then, how do I wanna respond? So there's so many ways we can try to arm our patients with good skills. But I love this mirroring thing. And this is a new concept, I think, for a lot of people. And therapists, we use this technique in therapy. So you nod your head, I nod my head. You smile, I smile.
That's right. And in fact, the people that are doing um, like investigations of fraudulent activity, and they bring somebody in, or other criminal activity, and they're interviewing the person. And so the research on this has been done where the table, the whoever the investigator is on one side, and the alleged perpetrator is on this side, and the table is a clear glass top table. And
Oh,
when
wow.
they're training investigators to be interrogating people, they tell them you got to be careful about how you behave because people will imitate you. And so they
Ah,
have a clear table because if the interrogator crosses their leg, and the person can see this through the table, very often the person that they're interrogating will quickly cross their leg too. And they're not
wow.
doing it on purpose, it's just interesting. So, how we behave toward ourselves then triggers that same reaction inside ourselves. And for a lot of us, it's just become automatic, like you talk about automatic negative thoughts, and they're automatic negative thoughts about the self. My go to response is, well, I'm an idiot, or well, I'm stupid, or I'm bad, or I'm a glutton, I'm
Mhm.
hopeless.
Right. Right.
It's automatic self blaming. And so when you catch yourself doing that, you go, whoa, 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 whoa. Hold on, take a breath. Okay, I got to bring that fiercely compassionate person who's going, oh, no, you don't. Inner critic, you're not
Oops. You're, you're breaking up there, Joan.
make it look abandoned or beat up.
Mhm. Yes, so I'm having some
Oh,
problems.
sorry
That's
about
okay.
that. I don't know where I lost
That's
you.
okay.
It's just bringing your champion.
Yes, yes, the fierce compassion, and I was thinking that maybe before you do your mirror session, that you could set up some guidelines, like, there will be no self berating. And if that happens, because it happens sometimes automatically, I'm going to say, wait a minute, I'm going to interrupt myself right now. And I'm going to remind myself that I am fiercely compassionate and that I am not going to self flatulate. I am not going to call myself names. I am my encourager.
Exactly right. And so then knowing what to look for when you go, oh, here we go. I hear it. Those are the things I always call myself when I start in my inner critic. I call this the people on the bus.
Hmm.
So if my husband tries to take over my bus and drive it off the cliff, she always says, "Oh, you did this, or you always do that." These automatics that I start thinking, and every time I catch those words starting to come
Right.
across my mind,
Hmm.
that's my sign.
Right.
I need to knock it off and bring my inner champion up,
Uh-huh.
not just the inner critic,
Right.
but my inner
I
champion.
love that.
So,
Another thing that I was thinking about is that, you know, affirmations. I don't know what the science on that is. You probably do. But I was wondering if, a lot of times, if it's that mirroring, the verbal mirroring, is if you hear yourself saying the affirmation, that it triggers the emotion associated with what you're saying. And then if you do it in the mirror, you see and hear the positive, and that triggers the positive emotion and makes that connection.
yes, that's exactly what happens. Yep. If you hear somebody, example, a good example of this is um, if we're listening to what I refer to as the not news, um, and it's they're maybe doing a segment of something very negative, people feel amped up. They feel activated, and then they start mirroring that behavior, saying the same kind of words, having and then justifying it, right? Because their brain got triggered because they were hearing it and watching somebody else say these things. So it doesn't matter if it's somebody else that you're looking at or your own self. So
Hmm.
if you're saying affirmations about yourself, and again, put some meat behind them, because if you have been told your whole life,
Yeah.
one of my patients said that her mother told her over and over and over and over and over, "You're just the ugliest thing I ever saw," over and over and over. So
Ah!
then if she that's typically what she would say to herself, and of course she's beautiful, so it's so tragic. So to for her to start to, if she just started to say I'm beautiful, there's going to be a part of her that goes, no, I'm
Yeah, right.
not. That's not
Yeah.
true. I have no evidence. So don't try to, whatever, gaslight yourself. Start with some affirmations that are not that hard to believe. Where, well, I try really hard. Okay, good. You can say
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
Maybe you're not the most successful, but you do try hard. Yeah, all right. Because if you overshoot, then you're just going to negate it and go, I'm not doing this. This doesn't make me feel any better. This is stupid. And
Right.
people will quit.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah, I love it. The scientific words, as evidenced by. You know what? I'm
mhm.
attractive as evidenced by, look how cute I did my hair today. Or as evidenced by, my eyes really sparkle. Or something that you can, something. I like my eyebrows, for God's sake, anything, but as evidenced by. And it's interesting because I've been listening to Barbara Streisand's autobiography, and of course, it's like,
Interesting.
7 inches thick. I'm not reading it, but I'm listening to her talk about it. And her mother, dear God, I was like, so her mother would go, very rarely would go to her events, her concerts, her plays, whatever. She rarely showed up. And if she was invited, for example, Barbara Streisand did a live event opening on New Year's Eve at the MGM Grand, I think it was, in Las Vegas, and she hated performing live. So, she had the most important people in her life there supporting her, and she invited her mother. And And her friend on the way into the concert saw her mother and the two other people that Barbara Streisand saved front row seats for leaving the theater. And the friend was like, "Where are you going?" She's like, "We want to go out on the town and have some fun. It's New Year's Eve." Not even that, and she would also say to Barbara Streisand, "Why would they pay you to sing?" And she would also say things like, she would like be at an event and she would be in the bathroom having a fit. Why are they praising her? I'm the mother. I'm the mother. I'm the one that brought her into the world. Why aren't they praising me? I'm like, holy moly. You
Mm.
know? Those things are hard to overcome, like the mother saying you're, the most unattractive thing I've ever seen. That's tough stuff.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yes. Yep. Yep. My mother used to say to me, "You're just not photogenic." Every year you get forced to do your school pictures, and you're just not photogenic. The best thing about you is, well, probably your
Oh my
forehead.
god.
And okay, so and that you've been told things like that, it's really hard to look in the mirror and go, "No, I'm beautiful." Or if anybody were to say that to me, I had to, after my surgery, I had to train myself. I had to say it out loud. When someone would say, "Wow, you're looking great. You're doing great," because I lost about 150 pounds, lost half of my whole self. And they'd say, "Wow, you look great." And my automatic reaction to that was, "No, I don't." So I would not let myself say that. I would say, but I'd have to say it out loud, even though I knew it sounded weird to the other person. Okay, I have to accept all compliments when I can get them. So thank you. I'm working on believing that. Thank you for telling me. That's as good as I could get. But I knew I had to say it out loud,
When we were in treatment,
and that was even before research.
when I was in treatment and at the treatment center, and for those listening who are coming to the retreat, I do this a lot of times. When we would get a compliment, we were to say out loud, even if we didn't believe it, "Thank you. I think so too," as our response. And let me tell you something,
Challenging.
challenging, but I'll tell you what, that has stuck with me all these 36 years, you know? It's like, "Thank you." And
Mm-hmm.
then inside your head, you go, "I think so too." Right? And we joke about it all throughout the retreat, but boy, I tell you what, you hear it. I'll tell you my favorite thing my mother said to me, and I'm being sarcastic. It kind of summed up the way think my mother felt about me my whole life. One time she looked at me straight in the face and she said, and I'm an adult, and she looks at me, she goes, "You are such a pain in the ass." And I'm like, "Well, thank you for at least putting it out there directly, because that pretty much sums up how I felt you have felt about me my whole life." So, I get you,
Yeah.
right?
It,
That stuff's hard to
it's
overcome.
it's hard to fight against that. It's
Yep.
become, your reality. So this mirror work stuff, if people are listening going, that sounds, I don't know, maybe you think it's easy, but I other people could do that, but I wouldn't be able to do it. I want people to hear loud and clear, this is really, really hard. And for people, maybe there's folks listening and go, "What's the big deal?" I could say that to myself. Well, that's fantastic. And I encourage you to do it and see
Yes.
how, as you're doing it, how you feel inside. If you don't feel like you're going to vomit internally or run, you're not breaking out into a sweat or
Right.
desperately trying to do anything to avoid doing it, that is fantastic. And I am so glad for you because that's an obstacle you don't have. But
Mhm.
probably, if you're listening to this particular podcast, you've probably had some obstacles because you're a human being and you're on earth. So
Right.
great, I don't want you to have more obstacles, but maybe there's something else that you've struggled with. It might be about your weight or your appearance. It could be something else.
Right.
I'm afraid, what if I can't keep up the success that I've had? What if I fail? And
Mhm.
sometimes people can set themselves up because
Right.
they are afraid of the future.
And that's one thing that
Yeah.
both of us want, for we don't want people to suffer more obstacles, and we certainly don't want them to create more for themselves.
Right.
So I'd like to
Right.
switch
So
gears
if
a
people
little
are like,
bit.
I can't do this. Yeah.
Now, let me ask you if you've heard about this in relation to mirror therapy, because I found an article that talks about mirror therapy, but it's mirror exposure therapy. Have you heard about that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so let me tell you what I
Tell me
found
about it.
about this. And, they use exposure therapy in the treatment of obsessive compulsive disorder, which I have suffered from since a child. People misunderstand obsessive compulsive disorder, much like they misunderstand the disease of obesity. But it's a really difficult disorder. And exposure therapy is something I resisted so much. This is hard, hard, hard. And I think the way they're using mirror exposure therapy is also very difficult. So I'm going to share with you what I've learned about it and some of the research that they have to say about it. And then I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. So,
Great.
obviously, what they're saying is that they're using this with people who have body image disturbances. And most people have body image disturbances, much less those who have struggled with their weight, up, down, lost significant amount of weight, whatever. A lot of people have negative body image and struggle with body image disturbance wherever they're at on that weight scale. So, what they do, and they say in a typical mirror exposure session, what they'll do is to have a person wear revealing clothing, like a slip or a swimsuit, and observe her body in a mirror. So, and they can do this with a therapist, same gender, usually, whatever. And they give them different types of instructions depending on the type of mirror exposure therapy they're doing. And before I tell you what these are, I'm going to tell you a funny, funny story that happened yesterday. So I met up with one of my longtime best friends from forever in Dallas a couple of weeks ago. And this woman is a psychologist and such an amazing therapist. And she and her husband both psychologists, and they've both been on GLP-1s for the last couple of years. And she's lost 100 pounds. And so her skin, of course, does what it does when you're in your 60s and you lose 100 pounds. It's all shrinkly. She's like, I don't care. I love how I feel. I love what I'm doing with my life. I don't care. And so we started talking about body image issues, and I struggle seriously with body image issues and have my whole life and have worked on it and made progress and all those things. So I get this box in the mail that was delivered while I was gone this weekend. It's on my porch. And so I'm opening it and she had sent me a bunch of little things. And in the box is a pink bikini. And I thought, oh my God. my, my granddaughter was here and she's 8 and she looks at me. She said, would you really wear that? I said I said, "Maybe if I was somewhere by myself." But I thought it was hysterical because she's like, "Listen, you know, let's get over it." And here's what I say, it's like I said to her when we were on our trip, I say to myself sometimes, "When does it end? When does this nonsense end?" I'm in my 60s. And I said, "I know the answer to it, and this is what I tell patients. It ends when I say it ends." And some days I'm capable of saying, "You know what? I'm done with this crap." And some days it's more difficult. Anyway, back to the mirror exposure therapy when you're dressed in revealing clothing. So, one of the ways they say to do this is to use a guided, non judgmental mirror exposure therapy. So, the patient stands in front of the three-way full length mirror and asked to focus on and describe her body parts using only neutral or objective terms. Talk about hard, right? Instead of saying, "Oh my God, I've got all that cellulite, my floppiness, and da 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 da." So instead, just describe. the color of your hair. Describe, the your hair's texture. Then move on to the next part and just focus on texture, shape, color, whatever. So, you go down the whole body. So just a neutral description, meaning you're not allowed to hear yourself say the negative things where and you're looking at yourself, so you're not allowing a reinforcement or a mirroring effect to trigger those emotions. All right.
And how did they stop them from being able to hear it? Say that part again.
Oh, they don't stop them from being able to hear it. I'm just saying being able to hear it and see it without triggering because you're not using those negative terms.
Oh, okay. They don't let
All
them
right.
say it. Okay.
Yeah. So the second thing would be what they are referring to as pure mirror exposure therapy. So in this one, you look at the mirror, you comment on the emotions, not the physicality, right? The sagginess, the whatever. So it's like I feel sad or I feel discouraged. So what they say is they can experience subjective discomfort there, but they say that those are both this is research, effective forms of mirror exposure therapy tested with those with eating disorders and body image disturbances. The third one would be mirror exposure with a positive focus. So in this one, they're instructed to focus on just a part of their body that they feel okay about and use positive language only. So instead of talking about problem areas, they say, "You know what? I really like my fingers. They do good things for me." Or I like my cheekbones, or I like whatever it is. So they say this works for 4 hypotheses. You modify your interpretation of yourself, right? So people with eating disorders, or body dysmorphic disorder, or body image issues have a tendency to interpret these things, or sometimes they'll make things up, or um, they focus on only the adversity related. So by using this, you're modifying your interpretation. Secondly, um, there's attentional modification. So reducing the bias, like your wings, your bat wings, or your whatever, your double chin. So it's cognitive restructuring, helping them to stop seeing their body through some filter or of being flawed. So, spreading the attention across the entire body and looking for more balance. So, not just hyper focused on the things that are most glaring in your mind. And then the third way they say that this is helpful is exposure, as in exposure therapy. Confront your fears. So, if we think of if the patient is asked to face fears surrounding body image. So the assumption is that after looking at your body in a more objective or focused manner, you become habituated, you know, f- saying you form the habit of no longer focusing on all of the negatives, but having a more neutral or positive thing. The other thing they say is that using this motivation exposure therapy can create cognitive dissonance, which then motivates change. So, for example, a person who describes her stomach as my my fat round white belly, right? Is what they say is okay. Describe your stomach as white, somewhat rounded, contradicts that I'm too fat. So describing it in less negative terms, my white, somewhat rounded belly is much better than the thoughts of I'm disgusting. So understanding that the reality of the what you're seeing is not nearly as bad as what you're telling yourself. Now, before I have you comment, can't wait to hear your thoughts about this. Um, it showed that in some trials, eating behavior was improved, and there was a reduction of emotional distress and negative thoughts and body dissatisfaction, at least for people who have eating disorders. There wasn't any studies using body dysmorphic patients, um, but it does appear to be helpful in eating disorders. But here's what it reminds me of. When I was like 19 years old, I was in therapy for anorexia, and there was nothing that would help me not see myself as morbidly obese. Because truly, when I looked in the mirror, it is not what I saw. Here's one thing that helped. It was the first thing that helped, which reminds me of this mirror exposure therapy, only it was a photograph. Because the mirror didn't work. I saw a very large person when I looked in the mirror. I weighed 98 pounds, and I saw 300 pounds looking back at me. So when in therapy, we did wear a bikini, and they took photographs of us. And when I looked at that picture, I did not see the person I saw in the mirror. I saw ribs. I saw bony knees. I saw skeletal thighs. And I was like, my God, who is that? So that was an effective way to see myself. And a lot of people will say, I didn't realize I was that big or I was that, small until I saw myself in the picture. So, what are your thoughts about all of this?
That that's a lot.
Yeah,
For one thing, the research was done in an interesting way because when I've worked with folks with OCD, my typical approach is a ladder. So I'll start with something that they can tolerate and then go a little higher, a little higher, a little higher, a little higher. So
correct.
I can decondition them slowly where they have some experience of success.
Correct.
However, some of the research, like the stuff that's been done by John March out of Duke, they don't take that approach. They say jump into the deep end of the pool and don't give people, too much scaffolding for self calming. Let them experience how uncomfortable it is because in time, if you just hold them there, then what they were afraid was going to happen will dissipate. And then objectively, they'll say, oh, I thought I was going to, fall apart. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I thought I was going to die. I thought the world was going to end. And then it doesn't happen. And then they have to come to terms with that what they were afraid of doesn't happen. Okay. But in what you're talking about with body image stuff, I can imagine a person saying, but you could make me look at my disgusting body all day long, and that isn't going to change what I think about it. Um, right, because they might have the same kind of filter that you were just describing that you had. You know, you maybe you could tell people what they wanted to hear, but if you're willing, you have to be a willing participant
Yeah.
in this, and that's
Yeah.
really important. You cannot help people that don't want to be helped. So
Yes.
if
Yes.
the person says, okay, well, I'm telling you, when I look at myself, if I said, oh, I have nice elbows, I'd be lying to you because what I see are elbows that are rippling with fat, and it doesn't matter the bone poking up, but that's what they see. So
Right.
you're asking me to lie to you. But if you show them a picture, then it feels a lot more objective somehow,
Right.
right? That's I think what you were just describing,
Correct.
So, and it's interesting that I don't know if maybe if that same thing was done today, where photoshopping pictures is pretty much a normal thing. If you were 19 years old and doing that today, you might have said, well, you probably, altered that. You may just made me
Yeah,
look
you're
a
right.
lot smaller,
You're right. Yeah, so what do
maybe.
you
So, you'd have to have some trust in the person, right? So then, but then you somehow they were able to present you with something outside your own head that you were able to observe and say, oh, that's me? No, that person's not morbidly obese. I can see her ribs. I can see this. She does not, that person in that picture, me, is not morbidly obese. So then you can hear yourself saying that out loud, and it can restructure the thoughts that you're having, which is fantastic.
and I think it kinda goes back to, you know, Judith Beck, what was that amazing book she wrote? It's like you try all these different things with people and see what works for them.
Right. Finding something that they can say, oh, yeah, that's true.
Right.
So, maybe I don't look great, but I try really hard. Okay, I can buy into that. When
Mhm.
they you were talking about the research and they said, okay, I want you to focus on a positive part of your body. It's almost a little bit like doing loving kindness meditation, where
Correct.
you start with sending positive energy to somebody who's easy. So
Mhm.
again, like my latter stepping up and working with folks with OCD, to start with something that you can feel like you can
Tolerate.
get some success with. And
Right.
then maybe it's somebody that's neutral. Well, okay, I don't hate my toenails, so okay, I guess I like my
Yeah.
toenails or my ears. Or my mother would say, well, my forehead, okay, I guess that's okay. And maybe I
Yeah.
don't love it, but I
Yeah.
don't necessarily hate it. And
Yeah.
then let the person sit there and savor that, soak
Mm.
that in. How does it feel to hear
Yeah.
yourself say, "Well, my forehead is okay,"
Yeah.
and then to not fight against it,
Yeah.
because again, a lot of times people resist doing this because they don't believe it's true, and they just can imagine themselves fighting against it. It's going to trigger my
Yeah.
internal critic and it's going to come fighting out. So you just do it in a slow way. It doesn't necessarily have to be jump into the deep end of the pool. You can
Right.
do it in a stepwise progression and you
Correct.
gradually decondition your belief that you can commit to yourself, at least the parts that are reachable. That I could do. I don't know if I could do that. I don't know. I'd like to see myself running a half marathon, but I don't. I can't
Yeah.
promise that
Yeah.
today.
But I can
Okay,
walk
can
half
I
the block.
promise that I could
Yeah.
walk around the building? Yeah, I could do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I
Yeah.
will tell you this, Dr. Joan Brugman. I like your example of using therapy, mirror therapy, much better than I like the mirror exposure therapy. And as a therapist, it fits much more closely with what I'm comfortable in as a therapist.
Right. Right. So you're not signing up to put your pink bikini on when you redo the mirror therapy yourself?
Listen, I struggled to put my swim shorts on. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness.
Yeah, but you have
Uh,
a lot of other things. You're a very healthy person. You're a yoga instructor and you
yeah.
do your video with your daughter every month. And so you can say, well, okay, I will not signing up to wear that pink bikini because you
That's
know
right.
what? I don't want to and I don't have to. I am okay with where I'm at. I don't
And
hate myself and
that's
I
right.
don't need to wear a pink bikini. So,
Absolutely. And you know what else I love? I love, what works best for me is knowing that I put the effort in and that's all I can control. Right? If I do the work and I eat right and I exercise, well, guess what? My body's going to do what my body's going to do. And I'm going to say, you know what? That's good enough. And look at me live my life. and I appreciate my life.
That's exactly right. So when we have patients that thought they were going to lose 100 pounds in the first month or something, and then that doesn't happen and they want to give up, well, this didn't work,
Yeah.
okay, or they're making the mistake of frequently weighing themselves at home, and they think
Yes.
that they're not having any progress because the number on their scale, that's
Oh
just a
my god.
regular bathroom scale, it doesn't tell, it's not a body composition scale, and they think the number is not changing, and they're not crazy, stupid, or blind. The number's not
Right.
changing. But
Yes.
what is happening internally
Right.
is that things are changing inside their body. I had a guy today tell me he has not had his surgery yet. I just finished his psychological evaluation, but he's been really working on getting his gotta do's lined up so that he doesn't have to learn all this stuff while he's trying to recover from surgery.
Which is so cool.
So he said, I don't understand though, because the number on the scale is not changing. But he said, I went from a size 46 waistband to a 38. I
Holy
can't wear my
moly.
46s anymore because they fall right down on the floor.
Oh my
And he said, so I
goodness.
don't know why the number's not changing.
That's
Right? So
phenomenal.
he said he feels the struggle of, but can he believe it? And I said, so again, the number on the scale is made up of a bunch of things that your scale's not telling you about. But
Right.
what does the evidence say? The
Exactly.
goal is not the number on the scale. The goal is to be healthy. The number on the
Amen.
scale is just a side effect, and it's got lots of other components. So that cannot be the goal.
All right. I
It's,
love
are
that.
you doing the healthy things?
Yes, and I love that that's what we are about, and I that is the greatest message, right? Okay, so, take home message that you wanna share?
I would say the take home message is that you have to be on your own side. That when good things happen to people that are on our team or in our group, we want to believe that the person deserved it. They worked really hard. They put the effort in. They're a good person. If something good happens to somebody that's on the opposing team, we would typically say, "Oh, that they probably cheated," or "that was unfair."
Yeah.
So people do what they get the most attention for doing. So, in
Mhm.
order to give yourself that attention, you have to be on your own side. And again, it doesn't have to be fluffy. It's good. Being accountable is good. And
Yes,
making changes that are in your own health interest, that is smart. So you can still be on your own side and recommit to yourself. Take responsibility for the parts that didn't work so well in the past,
I
but the
love that.
commitment is, what are we going to do differently in the future? Because you deserve to have me on your side. And by golly, I'm not going to abandon you again. So,
I love that. So, here's something you can do today, and it's not the full mirror therapy, but listen to this again because you want to do that. Maybe start by every day this week looking at yourself in the mirror and go, you know what? I'm on team me. And then imagine yourself saying back to yourself, darn right. Just affirm yourself and then work through that whole I love how you're using this, and I really encourage people to listen to this over and over again, and thank you again for giving me new skills, woman.
you are more than welcome. I've learned more from you than you've learned from me, I think.
I don't
Or
know
at
about
least
that,
it's
but
a
I
two-way street.
you got that right. Okay, so thank you again, and I can't wait to hear what you want to talk about next on our podcast. So, all right,
Great.
everybody, have a great week. Keep in mind, this is your health, it's your responsibility this day and every day. Signing off. See you next time. Bye, Dr. Joan.
Bye.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.